A woman named Samar. She describes a series of medical labs below a concentration camp. 4 stories down. Every day that she worked there, there'd be 8 or 9 bodies. Sometimes it was as many as 20, almost always young.
What this woman described is not an isolated incident, but part of a larger system, according to investigative journalist Ethan Gutmann, who has been researching forced organ harvesting in China for nearly 2 decades. He's the author of The Slaughter, and more recently, the Xinjiang procedure. Gutmann says one of the most disturbing patterns he uncovered is the 28 rule.
28-year-olds, 29-year-olds. These are people at the peak of their health.
A system where people are selected, taken, and processed.
And they disappear in the middle of the night. It's like a car that's about to go off the assembly line.
This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Yanya Killick. Ethan Gutmann, such a pleasure to have you on American Thought Leaders.
It's great to be here.
In your work on the Xinjiang procedure, on the forced organ harvesting aspect, because you cover a lot of ground in there, what would you say was the single most shocking thing that you came across that was most shocking to you in your work?
We talk about victims a lot in organ harvesting, and that's appropriate. We should be. But the truth is, the strongest witness that you can come up with is somebody from the medical world who performs some sort of surgery or is in some way tangentially involved in this nexus of organ harvesting. And in this case, the final witness in the sort of central chapter is a woman named Samar. This woman comes in, says, I'm going to talk about something that I haven't talked about to anyone. At first, she's telling it in the third person. She describes something, a series of medical labs below a concentration camp. 4 stories down. And there's these, 3 clinics, if you want to talk about it that way. And there's really a 4th one, which is sort of the first one you come to. She describes these, she says, there's no surveillance down there. But there's 2 guards who stand there, AKs at the low ready, totally masked. You walk between them, and then there's the first gurney, and that's where and I figured it out fairly quickly. She's been there. She's done this. Her job, along with a veterinarian who pulled her in as a kind of hire, was to remove the intestines. Now, normally you wouldn't even care about the intestines if you're dealing with a corpse. It's not essential to absolutely go after the intestines first. But if you're 4 stories down and your ventilation system is not that good, you might want to look into the intestines first, clean them, remove them, get rid of them. And in fact, they had problems with this before. The other 3 clinics were there to remove organs. You couldn't see them, but occasionally the door would open. You'd see somebody handling a kidney, a liver, and so forth. Every day that she worked there, she wasn't in the camp, but every day that she worked there, there'd be 8 or 9 bodies. Sometimes it was as many as 20. Sometimes it would be 3 or 4. Almost always young. To me, she was a central witness in a weird way. I mean, she brought it up to speed in a new time. Now, what connects her into the rest of the book is that they also, while she was working there, at one point the guards got together and gang raped her. What pulls it in again to the whole Uyghur experience of captivity is that the day before she left, ran away from this job, her supervisor put his hand into her pants as if he was assessing a piece of fruit, whether it was ripe or not. Literally while he talked to her. And she said, you can't do that. And he said, oh, you know all the rules, don't you? Oh, you're so up on things. You know everything. You know what? You're a Kazakh. And Kazakhs are a terrorist state. It's right here on our list. Okay? And we can do anything we want with you at any time. In fact, get here at 7 tomorrow because I have something I want to talk to you about. And that night she couldn't sleep. And she made a dash for the border. She left everything. All her bank accounts, everything she had. She came in with less than $100 in her pocket into Kazakhstan and was able to somehow get her way through the border in the middle of the night.
Let's sort of zoom out a little bit, okay? Frame for me first how Xinjiang is situated in China, how it's viewed, what's happened to the people in terms of dehumanization and so forth, and then why Kazakhstan and how you got in there. Let's start with Xinjiang. Let's start what it is. Who are the people? How are they different? And how does Kazakhstan fit into it? And finally, how is it that you managed to get there and do these interviews?
Okay, the Central Asia has always been sort of at the periphery of the Chinese Empire. Okay, it was something, a desert land out west, and especially in the north. The southern part, the southern western part is Tibet. It's this huge, massive plateau, which Tibet consists of. And the Chinese always had a very strong relationship, to some extent. Maybe a sort of admiration society, that the emperors would, you go into the tombs, the ancient tombs, and they're all Tibetan Sanskrit is everywhere. I mean, it's in fact, people have a hard time deciphering it, but that's what they insisted on. This is not true with the Uyghurs, which are the main people of what used to be called East Turkestan, sometimes Chinese Turkestan. Chinese call it Xinjiang, which means very simply new land or new territory, okay? So this is why the Uyghurs are very touchy about that. And even the title of this book, The Xinjiang Procedure, I apologize right in the beginning. I say, sorry, this is a user-friendly book. We're not going to control language here. I use Western terms like Western and Eastern. I don't really care if that's sort of, Eurocentric or something. Look, the bottom line is this is a very different kind of culture, and there's always been some kind of conflict between the Han Chinese. There's so much hatred now between the Uyghurs and the Chinese. It's so dramatic. There's so much dehumanization.
And this is the context in which, you're writing the Xinjiang Procedure.
The heat that Falun Gong and investigators, like me and David Matus and other people, had brought in on this, and Matt Robertson certainly, meant that they had to kind of rationalize the system a bit, and meant moving it out of the public eye more. One of the problems with Falun Gong is it's distributed throughout the country. We're talking about huge numbers here. I mean, I think you used the term 8.9 billion per year. I tend to call it 9 billion per year. I think it's a back of the napkin, I'd say, napkin kind of thing.
No, exactly.
But nonetheless, we don't really know, but we know that the numbers are huge. We know that once you added in things like ECMO, which is oxygenation and perfusion techniques, that you suddenly take an organ which was only going to last 4 hours, you can suddenly pull a lot more organs off a single person and get them and distribute them around. And so suddenly the profit margin goes way up on a single human being from, $100,000 or something if we're selling to foreigners, up to almost $1 million if you do it correctly, $750,000 at least. So that is these are huge advances that have been made within the Chinese transplant industry. They had to rationalize a little bit, and I started picking up signals that part of this and I can't explain the camps completely, but when they started that construction of the camps in 2015, something was going on, and they suddenly had this massive captive population that completely controlled, and that's what I felt I had to follow. The Chinese Communist Party learned a lot of things from the conflict with Falun Gong. You've got to keep the hospitals kind of private and don't let them talk. And you've got to keep the victims squared away. It's always a difficult procedure. The other thing they learned was don't let your victims out. Don't let the friends of the victims out, don't let the family members out, and so forth. A lot of Falun Gong got out from our perspective.
Enough to be able to talk about it.
That's right, and to do a lot of field work. I interviewed over 100 practitioners 50 of them were directly from labor camps and so forth, or at least very long-term detention centers. Some of them were from black jails. It was the Laogai system, and a lot of them got out. They got out through different means, and there's been wonderful things written about those stories because they're always fascinating. Nobody was getting out. You had these camps. You had, what even the State Department was estimating them at 1.5 million to 2 million at that point. Yet we had 9 people in the West who'd made it over to the U.S. That's nothing. So basically, they're not getting out. And my work revolves around field work, not just by choice, because it's what I prefer, though it is, but it's also true that in this case, there was no information to be gained about organ harvesting on the web. You could not sit at a computer and ascertain anything. The whole thing's a black box.
So let's take 2 minutes to just explain this. Okay, this is incredibly important. When the research started, basically on forced organ harvesting at scale, that the scale part, right, yeah, was about 2005, 2006, and every time, explain how this worked, like how we got to the point where there's no more. It's very difficult to find anything online.
Well, what happened was there was a group. There were several groups, but I'm just going to name one of them. And it's a mouthful, a World Organization to Investigate the Persecution of Falun Gong. I like to call it WIPE-FIG.
Yeah.
Okay, okay, so it's the most awkward acronym I've ever seen. But the people who were manning it had mad talent, okay? And they did nearly a superhuman effort of going through every hospital website that was potentially doing transplants and seeing what they said about it. But they didn't stop there. They went into dissertations. They went into Nurses Weekly. They went into all these different sources, and they hacked. They hacked medical files. And out of that, this massive amount of information came. What Chinese were claiming was 10,000 transplants per year, successful transplants.
Yeah, I'll clarify that. The official Chinese position was they were doing for the entire country 10,000 a year. And
now, Matt Robertson in his study was a very important part of breaking that because he found one hospital, Tianjin Central Hospital, which was doing 5,000 per year, which was in fact renting out hotel rooms for the amount of people who are having transplants. And that one caters to foreigners, so it's particularly interesting.
Right.
So right there, you've got 5,000. You look at Beijing 309, Shenzhen, there's a whole series of hospitals, Sun Yat-sen Hospital, and the numbers quickly escalate. In fact, so I tend to say it's about 60,000 per year at a minimum, maybe up to 100,000. Now, we'll never be able to do that Chinese transplant study again because they completely, even while we were working on the report, the hospital websites started disappearing, just like mushrooms after a spring rain. They were just gone. And now, in most cases, we archived it. Not in all cases. There's always a tragedy. But we did enough of it that it was very, very persuasive, and it was very persuasive to the CCC, for example. And it was a very important countermeasure at a time when China was announcing that they were moving to voluntary systems only. That's
right.
What they, and we had this evidence saying, not so fast. And it was very hard for people to refute the evidence at that time. But then, since then, the Chinese squeezed it. We had nothing. We had one thing that I knew. I knew that Kazakhs, ethnic Kazakhs, who were Chinese citizens, were getting out of Xinjiang. They were bribing their way out. They had connections across the border, that kind of thing. The border was a little porous. And so maybe several thousand had gotten out, and they were hiding out in Kazakh society. We'd never hear from them. And the reporters who went into Kazakhstan or went touring in Xinjiang never asked the questions.
And how many people did you manage to interview?
Really only 20, and I didn't throw out any of the cases, even the ones who didn't see anything that I wanted, because a study is a study. I wanted a very clear, we're not doing cutting room floor here. But that's why I'm kind of confident in the numbers, because even in the 4 cases where people didn't see anything or couldn't say they saw somebody disappear, I was able to at least explain where they were coming from. One guy was one of these consummate survivors who could survive in any camp because he just knows how to play by the rules. I mean, if I were in Auschwitz with him, I'd try to be his wingman, okay? You know, the off chance that I could survive just hanging around with this guy. So he doesn't see things. He doesn't want to see things, all right? It's often, that can be a really good survival technique. Another woman said, I didn't see anything, but then all these women kept disappearing because they had medical troubles. When I asked her about the medical troubles, oh, it's a high blood pressure. Oh, I think this one was a druggie. Oh, she got pregnant. I'm like, well, how did she get pregnant? There's no, it's a woman's camp, right? There's only male Han Chinese guards, right? Oh, I don't know. Her husband came back at that point. So we never got into that. But, you know, you see, when every time you had somebody like her, you also had other people who could absolutely sort of say, well, it was about 5% per year, or we'd figure it out. But it had to be firsthand. I didn't want numbers they'd heard from anybody else. I didn't even want to talk about organ harvesting. I just said disappearances. How old were they? Did you have a blood test? This kind of thing.
Ethan, just one quick sec. We're going to take a break. And folks, we're going to be right back. And we're back with the author of The Slaughter and the Xinjiang Procedure, Ethan Gutmann. Ethan, you have an unbelievable commitment to discerning truth.
No, I'm just stubborn. I'm just like following along on the Uyghurs. I'm just stubborn. I don't like to be told no.
No, but that's, I mean, this is something also I keep thinking about. You know, you're not going in with a preconceived notion. You're going in actually trying to figure out what's going on.
Look, I was very worried about that.
It's rare these days.
Okay,
yeah.
fair enough. I mean, look, I was I will be honest here. I was on the way to Kazakhstan, and I didn't let my daughter know about this because I think it would have upset her. A lot of things were upsetting her on the way. It was a tough trip. But, you know, I was thinking, what is this? You know, what if I get to Almaty and there's no pot of gold here? What if I'm just wrong? You know, I doubted it, but she asked me about that. She said, what are you going to do? How are you going to do this? And I said, you're looking for one weird trick, like they say on the internet. What's the one weird trick that I'm going to use? And I said, well, it's this 28 thing.
Let's talk about that, sort of the centerpiece of the book, and actually very important, and it almost bridges this, you know, kind of the early stages of this organ harvesting to the current stage. But maybe just talk about that.
Well, it does, because this was a discovery really by Charles Lee, Dr. Charles Lee. It was a discovery by these practitioners who kind of, I'm not sure if it was how they got a hold of those files, but they got a hold of these files. And what they were basically doctors' case files. And there was case after case of transplants happening. And they'd say something about the person, who was often male, not always female, but usually male. The age after age after age would come up, and it was 28. Sometimes 29. Actually, Charles argues that it's not really 29. I'm wrong, it's 28. We have this minor difference on it, but the point is that you are at the peak of your health at that point, and your organs have stopped growing. So it's natural they'd pick that. The other thing was that it always said heart failure. Oh, so this patient died of heart failure. Do you know what the stats are for heart failure at age 28?
Low.
About as low as you are ever going to have them in your lifetime. I mean, it's just one of these extremely unlikely things, unless you're like me and almost eat too much hot pot in Taipei, and to the point where you shouldn't.
Bad joke.
Yeah.
From the book, but yeah, let's not get into that.
Okay.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. There are certain things we know about disappearances. If they had a blood test and a DNA test, because now it's blood and DNA, it used to be just blood test, within 10 days before, and they're 28 years old, and they disappeared in the middle of the night. So it's very different from the other groups that leave. So there's a lot of times younger women, Uyghur women, would leave, and it would be announced at lunch. They'd say, these 10 girls are all leaving, and they're going to work at this wonderful factory. Let's have sometimes they'd even, you know, a little bit of applause for them. Okay? They're off to, you know, those women will work there till they're about 45 or 50 when they can no longer produce children, and then they'll be sent back. But again, that was done in the open. This is different. It happens in the middle of the night. Literally, I have a case where a woman used to spoon with another woman just to keep warm, terribly cold. And they were very close. And she only noticed that she'd gone missing because the bed was cold. So, and then the toothbrush was still there the next morning. You weren't supposed to talk about these people. Even the guards would look through you if you tried to. And by 10:30 in the morning, the toothbrush was gone too. That was it. The reason why we do this 10-day blood testing, that appears to be a kind of final health check before you do the transplant. But it's there for two reasons. It's not just there to make sure they're still healthy. It's also there to make sure there's been no mix-up. Okay? This is a huge system, as you've established. You know, this is a massive transplant industry, a system. And yes, it's all computerized, but people aren't really, they don't have chips in their skin. So you really want to make sure you get the right person every time. And this is that final check. It's like a car that's about to go off the assembly line. Mm-hmm. So I think that was very important. That was a big tip-off, and it's a small thing in a way. It is a weird trick, but it's nonetheless, you can generate numbers looking at that. And sometimes they're 29, sometimes they're 30, sometimes they're 27. But within that group is where you see a cluster. And part of our problem is, of course, yes, this whole thing, the whole response to the organ harvesting has been a case study in American failure on many, many levels, ranging from the doctors who assumed we'll just go in and take over this, and engage with our counterparts in China, ranging from the press, who's shown an incredible lack of interest and bought everything the Chinese Communist Party said about Falun Gong, and to some extent, the Uyghurs got a lot of shade too. Not as much, but they did get some shade. The politicians, obviously, there are huge exceptions, like Congressman Smith and so forth, but to a great extent, did very little or were cautious to do anything. Mm-hmm. The human rights organizations have been a disaster. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch. Human Rights Watch interpreted the fact that people were getting DNA tests as a kind of surveillance tool, that it was just a surveillance tool. It's an invasion of privacy, and it's not an invasion of privacy to have somebody looking you over about to take your organs and kill you while you're alive. That's a very different kind of crime.
As we finish up, what's your hope here at this moment, briefly?
My real hope is that somebody else will jump in at this point. I've been talking about writing some ghost stories of skiing ghost stories for years now. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's if we can move on, that's great. If we can't, that's okay too. But I would like to see a very active press community, and I think, again, I'd like to also use this as a time to examine, if we're successful here, we need to use this as a time to examine all the failures that took place here. We don't need this kind of decadence in the human rights world. You and I know this. Lots of people know it, but you and I sitting in this room, we know this. We know this is a huge problem. And we've always been reluctant we don't want to lose friends. We don't want to alienate people, but at some point we're going to have to face up to this. This is a major, major problem going forward.
Well, Ethan Gutmann, it's such a pleasure to have had you on.
Thanks.
Thank you all for joining Ethan Gutmann and me on this episode of American Thought Leaders. I'm your host, Yanya Kellick.